Right.
So, hey, we're talking about
No
the
problem.
idea of putting all code reviewers in the reviewer bucket. Uh, and I think it's an interesting idea, and I've heard it at GitLab for a long time. But the idea is, so GitLab traditionally has, traditional is not the right word. Most MRs go through two review process of a reviewer who is not a maintainer reviews the code, and then a maintainer reviews the code. And the maintainer approval is really the only thing that's kind of required. So there's a good amount of MRs. And earlier when I said most MRs do that, I kind of would surprise. I think most MRs probably do just the maintainer review. At least for
Really?
just one of them, for just front end or back end, because I think most MRs are very
Yeah.
trivial and it's just not efficient to do two reviews. I would think most MRs should probably do just one review, but I'm just guessing. I have no idea. Um, so let's discuss the
What I what one bit I want to share on this part. When I was when I just came to the company, I followed this suggestion to the T, and I assigned everyone. Now that I have more authority, not authority, sorry, not the right word, more, I don't know, understanding of the process, that hey, yeah, I'm changing just one line here, and it's totally related to the front end, but the rules, suggest that I have to have a backend review. Then I would ask someone for a backend review. Um, but sometimes I still, follow the suggestion because it's the official way, because
mm,
we have to do that. So even now I hesitate to break this rule, to
break
and
the rule of skipping the initial review and going straight to maintainer.
uh yeah, sometimes now I still follow the full review,
And,
even when I understand it's not needed. I still
mm,
want to follow this full process.
well, and I think it's yeah, and that even when it's not needed, it can be used for a good reason. Like, so I agree. I'm not saying that. Yeah, so we do have a process of you have this optional, often strongly recommended first initial review, and then the required maintainer review. And the proposal is what has happened over time, and this was not the case a while ago, but what's happened over time is the majority of engineers are actually maintainers. And it's a pretty significant majority. Um, and so that initial engineer, the non-maintainer review pool is a bit small and could be a bottleneck, for sure. So I think it's interesting to go back to what was the original intent of this process. I definitely don't subscribe to we shouldn't be following processes just for the sake of following them, but we should hopefully understand why they're there and try to make them serve our current needs. And if they don't, we got to really seriously reconsider them. But as I understood it in the past, this process existed because the maintainer pool was very limited and merge requests need to be pretty much ready to merge by the time it got to a maintainer. So that the initial review played a much heavier role in the comments on the merge request because we almost like need to get the merge request shaped up for a maintainer to look at it because maintainers were super overloaded and they were not many of them. That's not the case anymore. And I feel like, okay, when I consider this idea of, oh, and to add one more bit of context, to become a maintainer back then, you had to show that the maintainer review did not really add any comments to your reviews. Your review was effectively the equivalent. What you deemed, oh, this is approval, ready to merge, was effectively the equivalent of what the average current maintainer felt like. So, and in more or less words, the maintainer review was redundant because your review was already up at that standard. Um, so when we talk about, well, let's just put all the maintainers and reviewers in the same initial review bucket, and we can have that initial review and then a maintainer review. It doesn't make sense when I think about it from that the problems that the initial review was trying to solve at the beginning, namely of like, okay, if I'm a maintainer and I've reviewed this, I became a maintainer, and I know we become maintainers now for different reasons, but it's like, oh, I'm a maintainer. I've reviewed it. I should be saying this standard of this is good to go. It's very inefficient for me to then like, oh, but that was just the initial review. Let me pass it on. And it's in those inefficiencies I get really concerned of if it's like, oh, I'm only doing an initial review. So I'm not gonna worry about XYZ because that's gonna be for the maintainer. Now you start creating a bystander problem where because we've put two heads on it, it's great to have multiple eyes on a thing. And I think there's many merge requests that deem that needing to happen. And we have a lot of written documentation for domain experts to look at it. But if you put two eyes on a problem, sometimes it's actually worse than having just one because one eye can assume that the other eye is going to look at something, and that eye can assume that the other eye is going to look at something. And that has totally happened often with even just our current setup of initial review and maintainer reviews. I think as incidents and regressions come up, people start to, I don't know, they start to raise their own personal standard a little bit, um but yeah, so I have a crazy idea for how to resolve this situation of right now we have this bottleneck of a smaller pool of initial reviewers. um but I don't know, what do you think about my little rant? I'm not a huge fan of the idea of we should put everyone in the initial review because I feel like if a maintainer initial reviewed it, by the definition of maintainer, they should also be feel free to merge it.
Uh, I'm not sure that I can agree with that because you said the second part about having two sets of eyes is sometimes, or I don't know, maybe often, that is something that we want. Because in my experience, I saw reviewers note something that I wouldn't have noticed if I was the only one there. But you left a cliffhanger that you have a crazy idea, and I can't interrupt it for long. So please go on.
uh so um well, some more context too. So because of the double eye, it's really good to have multiple eyes on a thing, but you got to be really careful that the eyes are not assuming things of each other. And when eyes are stressed, it's like, okay, I don't have a lot of time for this one. Someone else is going to look at it. The best intention of eyes can leave some gaps. And when I know that something else, I'm not going to be doing my due diligence when I know someone else may be picking up. So it's very clear. It's very good to make it extra clear who is the DRI of quality on the thing, and that is the maintainer that's going to merge it needs to make, and that's in our handbook. But they're ultimately responsible for we did everything we could to ensure quality with this merge request. And I don't have to necessarily do all the work, but I have assured that we did the work. And so I'm checking it and we're good. Um, but so it's like, I mean, if someone wants to put on that hat of like, if I'm a maintainer and I've like, yeah, I've gone through everything, but if I feel like there's things I'm missing, I should reach out. We don't need an official two-step initial review, other reviewer to do that. So often I need to reach out to domain expert, or I could reach out to just someone else in the pool of like, I think this warrants another set of eyes. But my crazy idea is um I would suggest uh most merge requests um almost starting with a maintainer. And because that's another huge efficiency issue I see is that merge requests go through all these reviews from an initial reviewer, and then it gets to the maintainer, and the maintainer has a very different perspective on how something should have happened. And I think, and we've talked about this, we should get maintainers involved sooner than later. And so I would get a merge request to a maintainer, and then the maintainer can deem, or the author can deem of like, no, I want to do another review before I look at this. There's some things I need someone to take a deeper look at, and I don't have capacity to do it. So the maintainer should delegate. If like, oh no, let's do this initial review. I'm going to sign it over here and then send it to me. Um, and it could be to another maintainer, and that's totally fine and great. Um, or it could be into a reviewer. But I think that's where a pool of just initial reviewers um, could be most used is either an author looks at their own MR and is like, okay, I think I want to have this perspective before we look at a maintainer, but in all of our conversations, we need to know, okay, let's loop in a maintainer whenever it's relevant. Or let me go straight to the maintainer and they'll review. And if they feel like they need to do another review, then we uh then we go that route. Um But I also feel there's another tactic to reviews that we can add because one of the nice things we have with our current process is that a pool of non-maintainers are getting good training because they train on these MRs to review. But something we can do is an informational review where, as a maintainer, I feel like this merge request is good to go, but I'm actually going to assign someone as a reviewer to just look at what happened. Like, this was the merge request, check out these comments and threads. And that's kind of what we do in this meeting. But we could do it asynchronously where, hey, this was an MR that I think, I'm going to assign to someone in the reviewer pool to like, after I've given my maintainer approval, then I assign to an initial reviewer of like, hey, do you see anything? And I want you to also just learn from how we handle this review and how that fits with our culture. So sometimes even that non-maintainer review can be happen afterwards. And that could be more beneficial than if it was flipped. Those are
Uh,
my crazy ideas.
they are really crazy, but I think that there is something in that. Um, with the um, yeah, it's really complex. First of all, um, I think there would be some bias in different maintainers whether to assign additional reviewer or go on. Yes, it's not always clear. Um, as I said, I'm not always confident that I spotted everything, even if I, feel confident. I know that I might have blind spots. So have an additional reviewer, especially from the domain, is very useful. Um, I like the idea of having a reviewer to be to take a look maybe after the maintainer, maybe to say the final word in the merge. Like for example, maintainer already said approved, but reviewer has to also after that take a look and say that they agree, and that would be the green light for the merge. Yeah, I'm afraid that people would be hesitant to assign additional reviewers because it's against the fast flow. So it's you kind of go with a slower. You introduce, let's say that, bumps into the MR and it's not something that is easy to do,
Yeah.
to others. Like it's socially might be difficult to do.
Do
Mm,
you think the bystander effect happens?
yeah, yeah, I think so. It happens to me. So yeah.
Yeah, I get concerned when like our current system, we were overload, like, and we get to define how whatever these words means, and our when
Mhm,
I say we, and not you and me, I mean we as the company.
mhm. Oh, we
um
can,
we're not,
uh,
let's be real, we're not making any decisions right now. um the um our old process was really, we were really concerned about overloading the workload of maintainers.
yeah.
And I don't know. I still feel as a maintainer is like you can still get a number of code reviews. You can get that one code review that's like, this takes a lot of time. And it's
Mhm,
like, that's
mhm,
just inevitable. But what I could see that happening is it can create somewhat of a culture where as a maintainer, I feel like, oh, I'm not supposed to then, like, if I'm putting too much time into something, I'm not doing it. Maybe that means I'm not doing it right. I'm supposed to almost, some of the intention and that process was set up so that a maintainer is a little, was intended maybe to be more or less of just a rubber stamp. And it's like that's not a really great quality check. I want
mhm.
someone, we want to make sure something goes through one set of hands and eyes and is like, and is lovingly scrutinized through another set of hands and eyes. And that takes time, no matter what. And so to me is like, yeah, I feel like maintainers should be reviewing way earlier. And if maintainers are irritated by that because they are like, hey, well, I don't want to be, I don't know, shepherding these MRs that are so far from being finished. It's like, okay, well, you get to delegate. That's always been a thing. Hopefully you have a good relationship with your peers where you can ask them
Mhm,
to help out. Or B is like, well, maybe you shouldn't be a maintainer if you're not going to put in the time to review. Maintainers should be putting in time to review code. It's like
mhm.
they're there because they should be good at it and help everyone raise the quality of standard and collaboration. And if they're not doing that, is like, then they probably shouldn't be a maintainer.
Um, yeah, I agree that maintainer
I'm
should
I'm
be.
having I'm having
Yeah.
pretend, I'm my brain is like anticipating feedback that wouldn't happen. I'm like
Mhm.
responding to probably situations and people that don't exist. But
Ima Imagine that you are a maintainer. You don't need to imagine that. But you're you're asked to review something as a maintainer, and it's a direct jump to you now. Do you feel this hesitance to, like, how comfortable would you feel to say that, hey, this MR is too big for me to be the only person to look at this. Let's push it back.
I've done that a lot.
Because
Yeah. I feel like I've done that a lot. I mean, not, it's definitely not the majority of merge requests, but I would say it's like 5% of them, even after maybe there was one initial review. And this has happened where the initial review, maybe sometimes it was so big that the initial reviewer is like, sure, and check. And then I look at it and I'm like, okay, I looked through it, and me, I'm gonna, if it's passing through me, it's like I'm taking ownership of it.
yeah,
We're doing it. And then after I look at it, and very early, I'll say, okay, hey, I, I left some comment. Once we resolve them, I think we're good to go, but I'd like to get another set of eyes. Can we reach out to this person or this person in the domain or something like that? And I want to set that expectation up as early as possible. And
how would you say that? Because I think you phrased it just like I do usually, that we are good to go, but I would like to have some. additionalized. But it's not, it's not a blocker that I said that, hey, we have to have it
Yeah.
here. I just say that, hey, it would be, I think that it would be better if we also had another pair of eyes to take a look at this.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll say should, I think we should
Mhm.
have another. So it's different if I say, and I'm not speaking in the exact words that I use when I'm writing, but
Mhm.
it's like if I say right now, oh, I think we should, I think we should, then the conversation becomes, well, I think we're fine. It's like, oh, okay. But if I just say, hey, given the scope of this and some of the worst case scenarios, we should
Mhm.
have another pair of eyes. And I don't feel comfortable
Mhm.
without having another pair of eyes. That changes the topic of conversation if there wants to be
Mhm.
pushback against it.
Mhm.
But um I think that's another element for those conversations too, is and in every merge request, we should have some awareness of like what's the footprint of the change, not only of the code with lines of change, but also from the user experience. How much of the
Mhm.
user experience does this change have? One line of CSS can completely muck up the user experience. Uh, and so knowing what is the worst case situation and what's the risk of that is like that's really kind of those are the variables that go into the function of like, okay, do we need another set of eyes? And
Especially with CSS, yeah.
yeah, but efficiency is one of our GitLab values, and
Mhm.
we don't operate very efficiently. Um, Sometimes with the way we handle with our current process with reviews. And I think if we opened our minds a little bit, I think we could find more efficient ways.
I like the idea if the maintainer is the one who reviews the MR first, like not having the this bystander effect of having someone else. Um, yeah, I think we can experiment with different approaches. The bypassing maintain reviewer already happens. I think we just might want to somehow introduce it in our process and somehow put it to A/B test maybe.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. I
I also want to,
Go ahead.
sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just saying, I think, yeah, it's gonna take experimenting but what I've experienced is there's friction to changing the process that has been practiced for a long time.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I would just hopefully what we can all get behind was like this process that we've been doing for a long time was solving different problems than we face now. And hopefully that can just motivate us to experience, trying out. Is there a way that we could keep the same or better standard of quality more efficiently? And I strongly believe there is. I think our process is a little outdated. Like it's the same process we were doing when we were a fraction of the size of engineers that we are now. And so I think it's very possible there's a different kind of approach that could be same or better
Mhm.
quality
How do
and
we
more
prove that?
efficient. How do we
Like
prove it?
I think we are in a position that we have multiple options as to how to change the review process, and we have our own human ideas here. But if we do that, and that's also there was a CTO meeting, and Darva shared there that here one of the main concerns here, if we change the review process, we need to maintain this quality of reviews. And I think we are at the stage where we need to have also, some backup to this notion of the same quality,
Mhm.
especially if we reduce the review numbers.
Yeah, I think I think we should probably, take a some sort of working group to that's responsible for deciding and experimenting with some of these things. But I think you can also prove a little bit without experimenting. Like, so it's a very engineering. perspective to like feel like, okay, we got to set up an experiment to do A/B testing, but you can also just diagram out of like what currently happens and what are the, what's the flow chart of when the initial reviewer looks at it, what's the possible outcomes from that. And then when the maintainer reviewer looks at what's the possible outcomes, what's the lead times between these things, and how long did it take, and what was the risk of defect that happened from that thing, whatever. And looking at different flows, like you can see, oh, we get very similar quality results here with the same assumptions that we're making in the current process. We get some very similar quality of results with possibly half the time. And that's very interesting. And if it's with half the times, like now we're all more efficient. And if we're all more efficient, we're actually able to spend more time ensuring quality. Um,
Yeah.
and we're because when we're overloaded, that's when quality dips. And because but then yeah, I think another element too is like, we gotta maintainers, if we remove the initial reviewer gate, if that's not as firm now and things are going straight to maintainers more often, that's a side effect of some of the ideas I proposed. If we do that, um, maintainers need to be held accountable for if things are slipping when there were clear actions that could have been taken to not do that. And so right now, one thing that this is, I don't think that's a very likely scenario because I think GitLab attracts really good engineers that try to do their best. But um, right now, some there could be a maintainer that doesn't really doesn't really feel like doing the job of a maintainer, but kind of can just piggyback on the initial review, and be like, oh, well, I just trusted the initial, like there's that bystander effect that they could be inadvertently taking advantage of that when we remove that. Um,
It's already an issue, I think.
yeah, and that
So
might be the situation, but for those, the consequence would be more if we remove that initial review. But then my feedback would be those people shouldn't be maintainers if and we did totally overinflate our pool of maintainers for a period. And so that's a risk with some of the things that I'm describing. But I feel like,
what's the ideal number of maintainers?
oh, I have no idea. So it's a good question. And I mean, who's to even say that? Yeah, I have no idea. Um, I think it's such a dynamic on the team. To me, I feel like I want to communicate that a maintainer comes with a lot of extra work and a lot of responsibility, meaning that like it's your head on the chopping block if some things don't work out. And I want to communicate that such that only those that really want to do it will do it.
Mhm.
But that's hasn't been what we've communicated. We've communicated, hey, maintainers required thing for you to go through this career progression. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, that's maybe not the best way to handle this in the first place. So
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know.
One
I'm
one
just
of the
totally
things.
ranting now.
uh, I know you have a dog thing. Just before we Rob, I also it just came to my mind that the maintainership or reviewership also comes with one important benefit for the company is the pair code programming, which we don't, you have as the default process, but it's, an approximation of that. And this is where having a reviewer at least participate in this round. It's not just a small set of maintainers who do that, who interact with the world code base daily. It's everyone who could get
Mm.
into some distant code and thus share the ideas between the teams. For example, someone approached testing differently. Someone, I don't know, tries different state management, or I don't know. There are new GraphQL libraries that we could use, something like that. And it may, it forces the ideas to spread horizontally and us to share. So
Yeah.
this is so it's not just the quality of the MRs that we should track, but also this how to say that
Collaboration.
ephemeric,
Yeah.
collaboration horizontally, which I don't know how to track.
That's a great point. And I think that just is like we should really want, even if there's no action items, we should want maintainers and reviewers to leave comments on MRs of like if I just look at an MR and I left no comments, I'm not collaborating.
Mm,
I'm doing an approval process. But if I'm doing this, I'm like, oh great, like good job catching this thing. Even if I have no action item from that, but
mhm,
just me
mhm,
highlighting of like, oh, this is a great way of doing it, or
mhm,
nice, I'm glad we found this to do this.
mhm,
Um, I think we really, 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 really need to foster that communication in there because you're totally right. It's like this is our key collaboration vehicle,
yeah,
which is code review. And yeah, and in that sense, is like, yeah, some people, and it's a totally okay, is like they're collaborating in that sense is a lot of work for them. And that's okay. I don't expect everyone to be really good at asynchronous
mhm.
code review collaboration. Anyways, yeah, yeah, interesting. Yeah, those are my thoughts. We recorded them. I'll upload all those crazy code review process thoughts. Thanks for talking it out, and thanks for being passionate about like and bringing up too. Just um, I think you see the problem and have some really good ideas too, and I think that's um I think it's going to be really good. So I hope you find some capacity for yourself to try experimenting, you know, and encouraging others to experiment some of these other ways would be really interesting.
Yeah, the problem with experiments is that you're not the only one there, because it's about collaboration, and it's supposed that there'd be collaboration. Yeah, I do want to try out some of the things, especially the mergers in the timeline when the reviewer and maintainer comes in. Maybe
Mm,
maintainer comes in first, reviewer later. Maybe they come on in at the same time. Maybe right after the first review, whatever the outcome is, the maintainer comes in. So
yeah.
it's and yeah, definitely we already have data, as you said, for the only maintainer being present. So um I think what we want is a not a platform but a way of making experiments,
Hmm.
some way of analyzing that, acknowledging the quality and the collaboration, and yeah, just gather feedback about that. But if now I do something out of the process, I would just frustrate others. Hey, why are you assigning me this MR if you haven't properly finished the review here?
Yeah.
Which is, yeah, even if you have, best intentions, going against the process
Yeah.
is frustrating.
Well, I think for some people, I've definitely, you know, there's some ways you can augment the process in the name of efficiency, and other people can see, ah, cost is being really efficient here. I like it. And
Mm,
so some people can be a little irritated depending on how much you're deviating from the process. But as we've discussed, like whenever I was an initial reviewer on backend in Mars,
mm,
even without me approving it, I want to get the
yeah,
maintainer in
try
as
to push.
early as
Mm, mm,
possible.
yeah.
And there was only one merge request where I felt like that was confusing. And I kept trying to say, like, no, you don't need my approval. But other merge requests was really appreciative of it because it just
Mhm, mhm,
totally streamlined,
mhm,
and like what would have taken probably just sitting for a couple of days wasn't sitting anymore. And
mhm,
like I think so sometimes we can just augment our own behavior a little bit and see how that sticks. And so that's one of them. I really like that issue you made for I think that's a really great call. Yeah, I think the main thing, the reason I wanted to record, I felt the rant coming. I wanted to record was like I'm not a fan of the let's keep the same process and let's just put all the maintainers in the initial thing. Is like
Mhm.
I don't think that's the solution to the problem. I think that's trying to solve the reviewer bottleneck problem. But I feel like as a whole, we have an efficiency problem we could address with more
Mhm.
effective ways. Um,
Yeah, I agree, but the putting the maintainers to the reviewers bucket was only a suggestion to fix the current problem, as you said. As a yeah, we may, if we stay super conservative, we can try different things like putting maintainers into the reviewers buckets. But I think that we do want to experiment, and I think there is a shared sometimes frustration in the company that hey, this review takes super long. We want to be more efficient and somehow more adaptive. Yeah, I like this renting session.
yeah,
Thank you for hosting it.
yeah, cool. Yeah, yeah, thanks for hopping on. I'm glad you're able to make it. I'm gonna go take care of my dog,
Thanks,
so
Paul. Yeah.
I'll let you go, class.
Take care, you too. Yeah.
Yeah,
See you.
see you around.
Bye.